Today, employees typically switch between 6 to 8 SaaS applications from different vendors to complete tasks, switching context constantly. Application developers see an opportunity to use generative AI to reduce this context switching and provide a richer end-user experience, but are often limited to data within their own software. Without including cross-app data, data silos form, and generative AI results miss important context from other applications that help end users make better decisions. AWS App Fabric for Productivity reimagines productivity in SaaS applications by generating insights and actions with context from multiple applications. App Fabric fully manages the integrations with multiple SaaS applications and automatically normalizes data for use across apps. This means developers can enable App Fabric productivity features directly into their application's user interface to maintain a consistent app experience for their users, whilst surfacing relevant context from other applications. With cross-application context, developers provide a more personalized user experience that increases adoption and loyalty. End users benefit from accessing insights they need without interrupting their workflow. Embed AWS App Fabric in your application's new or existing generative AI assistant to enable your user to be more productive and more connected across their preferred apps.
AWS App Fabric is a service that manages to connect multiple SaaS applications together. Since our launch in June, IT and security professionals have been using AWS App Fabric to enhance the security posture of their companies across very complex application stack. Today, we're excited to continue our journey working with developers to reimagine the productivity for employees. While many SaaS productivity applications are designed to enhance the productivity of their users, the average employee needs to interact with 6 to 8 applications just to go about their day. Disconnected applications ultimately lead to data silos forming across all these applications. And that leads to critical information at risk of being missed to execute critical workflows to execute their workforces. The typical employee tends to spend over 12% of their time just trying to locate information that dispersed across these data silos. That is 1 hour of every day being used to try and locate what is important to me to just go about my day. But what if we could change this? What if we could create an experience, much simpler experience for employees, so that they can stay in their flow of work? While a solution that we've seen emerging over the past 12 months has been to introduce some form of conversational UI to enable users to interact across a broad portfolio of knowledge in their company, we've also realized that that leads to employees to add yet another application, yet a new user interface that they need to familiarize themselves with, and therefore exacerbates the cognitive overload that users have as they need to understand and go about their work. With AWS App Fabric, SaaS application developers can actually embed the ability to surface what's relevant for their users in their applications using an interface that their users themselves are familiar with. And this creates an opportunity for application developers to create highly personalized, user-centric experiences that are centered around your work. AWS App Fabric allows application developers to surface actionable insights that rely on the context and the content that users have across all their applications that they need to go about their day. This is enabling application developers to create very personalized experience, and ultimately users are benefiting from increasing productivity and execution of their cross-functional workflows. Today, I'm particularly excited to be here with an esteemed panel of AI experts, builders, and operators in the world of SaaS applications. My name is Federico Torreti, and I lead product for AWS App Fabric. And I'll ask you all to help me to welcome to the stage Matt Bell, the head of product research at Anthropic, Eric Peltz, the head of technology for artificial intelligence at Asana, and Varun Parmar, the chief operating officer at Miro. Please join me with a big welcome for our folks. Aaron.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Matt. Thanks. Eric, thanks. All right, folks, so before we get into the thick of building generative AI experience in SaaS applications, Matt, maybe I'll start with you. For those that might have missed Adam's keynote and Dario's segment with Adam, would you like to describe Anthropic for those that may not be familiar in your role there?
Sure. Anthropic is a large language model company that's developed the foundation model Claude. Anthropic was founded by 7 former OpenAI employees who formed the core team that developed GPT-3 back in 2020. And they left to focus on building large language models with enterprise-grade safety, so steerability, reliability, interpretability from day one. And they've been particularly focused on creating powerful yet safe models that can deliver state-of-the-art performance across a wide range of tasks. In fact, we recently released Claude 2.1, and I believe it's now available on Bedrock as of this week. Claude 2.1 has a 200,000 token context window. For reference, that's about 300 pages. And that means that you can provide 300 pages of information to Claude in the prompt so that essentially it can start as an expert in whatever task you're about to have it do. Anthropic has been particularly excited to partner with AWS so that any enterprise developers on AWS are able to securely access Claude from their VPC via Amazon Bedrock.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, I'm Eric. I've been at Asana about 9 years, and I'm currently leading our AI organization. In our AI work, we span from incubating new frontiers in work management and managing like the future of work, building foundational frameworks and infrastructure to support for ML and LLM use, and shipping great product experiences. Before working on AI, I was leading our workflow and platform teams at Asana. And for those who don't know about Asana, we're a leading enterprise work management platform that helps organizations find a smarter way to work, everything from ICs all the way up to the executives working on their strategic initiatives. We're trusted by leading enterprise companies in health, retail, media, financial services, and tech, including Amazon.
Great. Varun?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Varun Palmer, Chief Operating Officer at Miro. Maybe just show of hands, how many of you are familiar of Miro, either have used it? Oh, amazing. That's great. OK, so I don't have to spend too much time explaining what Miro is. But for those of you who are not familiar, Miro is a visual workspace for collaboration and innovation. It's great for ideation, brainstorming, doing agile practices and rituals. More recently, we've started to add some use cases around technical diagramming, cloud infrastructure visualization and such, and some really great feedback that we're getting. And up until recently, I was the chief product officer for Miro, and recently took over as the chief operating officer. But just in terms of my background, I've been doing collaboration apps for well over 20 years. So I like to joke there's a good and bad about my experience. The good is that I know collaboration because I've been doing it for over 2 decades. The bad is that's the only thing I know, so I don't know what else I would do. But great to be here with both Matt and Eric and Frederick.
Well, it's not a bad background knowing that people say this is the collaboration era. So
yes.
a lot to lean on.
Indeed.
A lot to lean on that. And so I think it's been interesting to see over the past 12 months there has been this arc of the technology. We've seen a lot of applications being built around conversational UIs, conversational interface that has really spanned a lot of the generic public interest, because we're now seeing a lot more of the public to be able to engage with this technology. And so it made generative AI as a very approachable technology. But then there is the other side of the coin where building and operating generative AI models is probably not as approachable. And maybe, Varun, staying with you with this experience, so, from your perspective, how can companies think about embedding generative AI capabilities in their applications?
Yeah, maybe like taking a step back, I think I can sort of talk about like our journey, and like that can inform some of the ways folks are thinking out here. I think like there's like multiple levels or 3 levels of alignment that's needed. Like I think the first one is in terms of like what is the business value that you're trying to deliver. And I think like the reason why you need to start there is because it determines the level of investment and focus that is needed around these things, right? So as we know, to do something really basic or trivial, it takes a small amount of effort and you can get away with it. But then if you're really trying to drive outcomes, then you need to make sure that there is alignment at the highest level. The way I think of it is, think big, but start small. So, if you're trying to drive business outcomes, think of like these big transformative use cases, but when you're coming and defining the first set of use cases or the capabilities, think small and think incremental out there. So I would say that's one. The second thing is like, how do you actually get started, right? So there are like some, best practices or methodologies and so on and so forth folks talk about. What we've seen work really, really well is once you've defined sort of what the goal is, the North Star is in terms of what you want to do here, you want to make sure you want to democratize, how things happen. So in our case, we've done hackathons where the theme of the hackathon for all the 700 engineers in the organization was around AI. And it's like, what is the art of the possible? These are some ideas, seed the thoughts. But what we've seen is what doesn't work as well is if you actually have a small team sitting on the island that's trying to come up with some of these ideas that actually you democratize it and then you embrace it. And then the third one is in terms of launching these things is making sure that you're setting the right expectations with your customers in terms of like, what they should expect and what the pros and cons and, what the guardrails are around all of these things. And for us, like we are very, very clear in terms of what are the set of AI principles we have, making sure we are setting the right expectations in terms of enterprise buyers around these models and what they can and cannot do and giving them optionality in terms of turning it on and off.
Choice being an
Choice
important.
being big, yeah, yes.
And I know, Eric, you have a lot of experience. You talk a lot about human-centered AI. What has been your experience here?
Yeah, so I think to me as an engineer, like the biggest innovation with generative AI is just how easy it is to get started and prototype. Like it's like building an integration, but the API is magic and can do a ton of things. And it also can do a bunch of things you're not expecting and hallucinate and all these other things. So it's kind of this magic box that does a lot. But you don't need fancy infrastructure to get started and explore the art of the possible. So I think for those getting started, just like dive in and start doing things. You don't need to build anything. You can use the playground, just try things out, see what works, see what doesn't work. Then it actually gets a lot more challenging. So we found, and I think this is common everyone I've talked to, like the distance from like something that works in an alpha or a beta to getting it production ready is way bigger than in traditional product development. So I think part of the challenge here is like, once you get started, then what do you do? Like, how do you actually get it productionized? Because a lot of these muscles, your organization's probably not used to. It's stochastic at heart, it's non-deterministic. There's new technology to customers, they're worried about privacy, controls, there's all sorts of trade-offs that your company and your customers aren't used to, especially if you're an enterprise SaaS. So for us, like conversation with customers has been key to this. And when we were first getting started, I think we were 2 or 3 weeks into using LLMs. We didn't have a designer working on it or a PM. I was pretending to be the designer and the PM. We were just getting started building Smart Status. Smart Status is, so if you're working, you have a status update, you need to tell your stakeholders, what are the risks, what are the blockers, how is progress going, what do you need help with? When you collaborate, there's a lot of those insights hidden throughout the tendrils of like your comments or tasks being completed, decisions being made. So with LLMs, we've been able to have Asana just intuit those and get you started 80% of the way. So we built our first prototype of Smart Status. It was rough around the edges, really bad UX, but we showed it to customers. I was like, oh, maybe this will work. Maybe customers are gonna be like, what is this? But their eyes lit up. They were just like, this is amazing. This will save me so many hours. When can I get this rolled out? What can I do? And they gave us a lot of directional feedback that was really helpful of what they wanted, what they didn't want. So I think from that, it's just also getting your customers' hands as soon as you can in a kind of a limited pilot way to see what they think and get feedback.
And that speaks to the concept of experimentation, which is ultimately really fueling this pace of innovation where we've been seeing with the technology. And Matt, you work a lot with a lot of builders across many segments, and we've seen a lot of changes so far in the product experience. How do you think that's going to be evolving over the next 2 or 3 years?
Sure, yeah, 2 or 3 years is actually a lot of time given the pace of change that's happening. I will say what I have seen be successful over the last year and what I believe will continue to lead to success is, first off, every company needs to develop subject matter expertise in how to work with LLMs. And this comes in various areas. The two that I think are most important to highlight are prompt engineering and ML ops. We actually have extensive prompt engineering tutorials and interactive tools for quickly leveling people up. Those are all available at docs.anthropic.com. And then on the ML ops side, this is basically learning how to assess the performance of an LLM before you bring it into production, as well as after. Given that these models are inherently stochastic, you want to ensure a high level of performance that your product team is happy with. And this is something where UX is incredibly important, and I believe this will remain true. So suppose you have some tool that you've built for your application that works 90% of the time. That could either be incredible magic, or it could be utterly frustrating, depending on how it's revealed in the UX and how users can correct its mistakes when they happen. And so as you think about productizing any LLM-driven feature or application or product, I recommend bringing the product and UX teams in at the beginning and being super clear and upfront about what success looks like, so you can very quickly tell if what you have is likely to succeed and likely to work well with users. And then you're going to want to continually update your sense of what is possible every few months based on all of the improvements that are happening in large language models. So for example, 9 months ago, doing something with agents, a LLM system that can take multiple actions over a period of time, that was like incredibly shaky and out there 9 months ago, whereas we're now seeing agents use cases in production. And so you'll need to continue to pay attention to all these improvements as they come and actively experiment with them to get a sense of what is possible so that you know when you can build a product off of it.
And so it ties back to the quick prototyping, push it out to customers, get feedback, and adjust accordingly. Again, I think there is an overall theme of adaptability across multiple dimensions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe if I were to just add in terms of like the next 2 to 3 years, I think like my perspective is that today, from a user experience perspective, Gen AI is an additive experience, right? From just like Asana, like we're in the collaboration space, right? And one of the challenges we face in collaboration is that there are all these capabilities, these features that you keep adding, but there's a diminishing return because the discoverability of those features, goes down as more and more are added. So I think a big opportunity is actually in how do you actually move to much more of a solitary sort of UX as opposed to an additive UX where it's not like one more thing, one more option, one more entry point, but that you actually start to reimagine the user experience. So my bet is next 3 years is that you'll actually see some fundamentally different user experience paradigms that will start to emerge that are powered through these Gen AI large language models that simplify the interaction between the application and the user. So this whole notion of human-computer interaction, like this whole HCI space, I think is up for like a lot of interesting stuff in building these paradigms.
Yeah, totally agreed on that. Like I think about very complex applications that normally have quite a long learning curve, and any first-time user is just intimidated by this wall of like 100 different control surfaces on the screen and doesn't know where to start. And I think LLMs, through a combination of natural language interface for asking questions and learning what's possible, plus anticipation of what the user might want to do, that will just make learning curves for these applications like far shorter.
Yeah, I think the ability of large language models really to have this reasoning capability, we've seen a lot with the advancement with Claude 2.1 has been really at the forefront of that. They're really enabling a lot of these more proactive experiences. Eric, I think Asana, you've developed an overarching mental model on how to think about product experiences.
Yeah, and I think like the phrase that I was thinking we were saying is we've been saying like LLMs and AI should help connect the intention to your outcomes of what you're trying to do. You shouldn't need to learn every button click and sign up for a product and learn the product before you get started. Like product should be built and personalized just for you. So we were kind of thinking about the future user experience in like 2 large flavors. I don't know what it will manifest as, but like there's something about like proactively flagging like what needs your attention and how do you move forward, how do you move work forward. We're calling that air traffic control. you shouldn't spend hours of your day reading email, catching up on work. It should just, you get started and it's like, oh, based on your role and the context and what you've been doing, like this has changed, this needs your attention, focus here. The other is focus on what's your mind, your intention, and like co-create a solution with AI. That's why you're seeing the phrase co-pilots pop up so much in the industry. But right now, those interfaces are all text-based. That's not going to stay the case. When we're collaborating, we don't send paragraphs of text back and forth. We whiteboard, we have diagrams, we have visuals. Like the media needs to adapt, and AI is getting really great at doing that as well, and that's going to continue being there. So this like text back and forth is definitely going to change.
And I feel like then I'm trying to connect the dots here. So experimentation on the core of accelerating and thinking about the product roadmap. And then there is this tension, this natural tension on balancing these R&D investments, this prototyping, this experimentation that may yield return over a longer time horizon than investments that may actually unlock customer value now and today. And so maybe I'll start with you, Eric, how are you thinking through that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a scary one. If we're looking at the news the last few months, like OpenAI Dev Day happened, and there were lots of tweets of like AI leaders being like, my 6-month roadmap is going demolished, or my startup, like what are we doing now? So it's really hard to plan ahead when things are shifting so quickly. So I think there's 2 parts. Where do you invest your time now, and how do you adapt your teams so you can move faster? So for where to invest your time, I think as Varun, you were saying, like focus on your customer jobs to be done first and foremost. Like where are you helping customers? Where's your differentiators? Where are your moats? And like invest in that, strengthen what makes your company special. I think some people are forgetting their normal software engineering best practices, and they're doing these like mega like files and prompts with everything. Like lean into composition, lean into modular architecture, observable and testable code, evaluation pipelines. Like when you change something, you should know exactly what happens. It shouldn't be like a whack-a-mole that you change one thing and 30 things break. And I think also people are forgetting the foundational elements of enterprise software, like access control, scale. These all get more important with AI, not less important. And I think a lot of companies are like, oh, where do I find the budget to work on AI? Let's take it from access control, let's take it for this. And that's the opposite of what you want to do. You actually need to invest more in those as you're working on this.
Privacy and security are really at the core of it.
Yeah, because if it's your company already is really nervous about which employee can get access to what data. There's autonomous agents getting access to data is even more important to be careful on. So, yeah, and I think the last thing is when you're moving really quickly, we found it really useful to align cross-functionally with like what parts of the end-to-end user interface or experience are we confident about? And the answer is a lot of them are not. And then for those cases, like don't spend 3 months polishing the perfect design mocks and building the perfect flow if you think in a month you're going to throw it out. Just do that in a day, like unblock yourself, show it to customers, move on. Focus your time where you think it's going to be sticky and where you can like kind of keep building off of.
Mm-hmm. And Varun, you went through this with Miro Assist, the launch of Miro Assist, and you talked about earlier anchoring and investments, working backwards from what is the business problem, what's the customer pain point that you're really trying to address. So can you take us through maybe how did you approach that process as you folks made investment and ultimately built Miro Assist?
Yeah. So I think like we went through a journey much like many of the other companies. I think the first step of the journey was just make sure that you get something out so that you're not the only company that doesn't have Gen AI experiences. And I think that was the single thing is like time to market, make sure that there's something out there. Obviously, there's a secondary benefit to it, which is you're trying to learn from your end users, what are the things that you use. So in our case, we actually launched something, I think it was like a 7-week sprint. And we launched 14 capabilities. We took 14, canonical sort of use cases, and we added AI magic to Eric's word, like AI magic to those things. And the whole idea was we don't know what's going to work. We don't know where the end user is going to see a lot of value. So the best thing to do is, ship them really, really fast, and then see what the response is. And much like many of those things, I think what we found is that in our case, there is not an 80-20. There is actually a 95-5. 5% of the features are driving 95% of the usage. But maybe it was just that we rushed a bunch of things, and that's why the ratios were such. I think sort of looking at our existing sort of plan and strategy going forward, I think the unique observation that we have right now is that for the first time, I'm seeing that there is a brand new piece of technology that is relatively new and being baked, where the willingness to pay by the customer is very high. So the fundamental framework that we are using right now at Miro in terms of prioritizing our capabilities and functionality around Gen AI is what are the features we believe that fundamentally the customer will say pay additional money for. And the last 90 days, I actually did a tour, and I went and met with about 15 different CIOs in North America. And 75% of them, and this is just like, it's not like a scientific study, but it's just like 15 CIOs just discussion, 75% of them told me that they are going to have a net new line item in their budget, which is going to be around AI, and meaningful amount of money is going to be put in there. So the insight for us here is that there's literally an opportunity not only to actually make the product better from an end user usability and automation and workflow, but really to accelerate revenue, and that's actually the guiding pole that we have internally in terms of prioritizing those things.
I think it ties into a recent study AWS published as well, where we've seen that over 90% of the companies that we surveyed across several industries are expecting some form of usage of AI technologies becoming more and more prominent as part of their business processes.
Yes, yes.
So that seems to be a consistent theme.
Yes, yes, exactly.
And so as we're thinking about creating roadmaps, we talked about there is a lot of the pace of innovation, the technology. There is a lot that we don't know yet about the technology. It sparks the question as to whether we need to approach product roadmapping also somewhat differently. And Matt, I love your perspective as to whether you feel like we should bring additional stakeholders, other experts, as engineering team, product team are starting to double around how to think about their product experience over the next 6, 12 months.
Yeah, I would say there are several categories of experts that make sense to bring in. I already talked about the importance of UX and how that can make or break AI-driven features. I would also say, depending on the type of use case that you're pursuing, it may make sense to have subject matter experts in the type of intelligent behavior that you're trying to get from the LLM come in and do extensive benchmarking of what good performance looks like. As well as if you're, say, fine-tuning a model, you'll want to bring those experts in to generate reinforcement learning for human feedback data. So essentially, this is data that's used to show the large language model what a good response looks like in order to maximize its performance and bring the style of thinking that is required for that subject matter expertise into the model so that you consistently get that kind of performance. Separately, those subject matter experts are great in terms of doing the test-driven development and ensuring that performance is good across the full range of potential user inputs.
That's super interesting. And I feel like there is this there is heightened attention on what are the societal impact on some of these experiences. It's super important to really have this broad range of partners that you can tap onto and ultimately inform what are some of the unknown unknowns, if you will, that it's worth watching out for. So again, it reinforces the focus on understanding the evaluation of some of these experiences as well.
Yeah, that's very much an important point to bring up. To talk a little bit about edge cases and potential risks, there are a few flavors of areas to pay attention to. So one is hallucinations. So all state-of-the-art language models still hallucinate sometimes, and this is something where they may make up an answer as opposed to saying, I don't know. For what it's worth, humans also hallucinate, and that's a separate problem. But there are several methods of addressing hallucinations. Basically, so Claude has been trained using something called constitutional AI that embeds a set of moral principles in the model. And one of those is to basically only answer if you are confident that you have the knowledge to answer. Separately, you can address hallucinations with prompting. So you can basically force the model to show its work. You can say, okay, cite the source material that I gave you in the prompt before answering, and then explain your thinking process. And then that way, users of the model's output can go back and check the model's answers. So that's hallucinations. Bias is another one to be aware of. I actually think the AI community has done a great job of jumping on the bias issue. I recall going to the NeurIPS conference as far back as, I think, 2014 or so, and there was already a whole group looking at bias. And I think that while bias is a potential issue to be aware of, large language models are remarkably good at being less biased when you tell them to avoid certain kinds of bias. I think they actually substantially outperform humans in this case. That you can walk up to a model and say, hey, avoid these kinds of bias in your response, and you will get that to actually happen, whereas it's a lot harder to get a human to do that. So while bias is an issue, there's some very mature techniques for dealing with it. Constitutional AI is also used to reduce bias, and Anthropic has several papers where you can look at bias levels against several common bias benchmarks.
And I think, so we're going to get into safe AI. I think there is very much to discuss there, a lot to discuss there. But I think you mentioned the world involving expert partnership a couple of times. And so maybe from the engineering perspective here, how do you make that decision? At what point do you partner with somebody versus actually deciding to build and taking on the workload yourself? So that partner versus build dilemma.
And I feel like I'm maybe starting to be a broken record here, but like you've all worked with partners before, probably. I think one of the things early on at Asana we had to train our people is like, hey, this isn't that different. There's a lot of your core things you need to do. So build versus partner is a classic thing. You want to look to a partner when they can deliver customer benefits either better or faster than you would be able to do it yourself, so you can focus your innovation tokens on what's unique to you. I think what makes Gen AI different is pace of innovation, shifting landscape. We've talked about that, as well as customer sentiment and partnerships having a lot more impact in the decision than just pure technical factors. So because things are moving fast, you have to think in order of days, not quarters, and that just shifts not necessarily which partners you work with, but how you use those partners and how you plan around it. You can't spend 6 months on an RFP for working with a partner, because in 6 months it might change.
Well, I guess it will change.
It will change. And then I think for the other end, like if it's not purely technical, just like what's the quality, then how do you decide which partners to use? I kind of think of this as two partnership buckets in my head. One is there's sets of horizontal problems. Everyone hits these. Every technology company is going to hit these, and you just need to look at like just purely, can you move faster by doing this? Is there a sticking cost? Like how much are you going to be able to pivot and iterate later? I think an example you were mentioning, like tooling, like LLM tooling for evaluation pipelines, like that's a clear one. You just want to figure out how to move faster with that, and you want to look for near-term ROI for that. I think the second is like deeper partnerships, and these are like, how do you invest with a company that you have mutual beneficial reasons to help one another with their respective missions? So these take longer, but you will, if it works out, achieve bigger outcomes. So I like to think about us in that example. We started working together 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and none of our conversations were like, in 2 months, what's the best thing we can do? It was like, how do we like work together long term and help Asana and help AWS and help the whole ecosystem? How do we kind of build across our product, technology, customers? And we've kind of learned and pivoted together as we've gone on. For all these cases, though, you just need to be nimble and like focus on where to put your innovation tokens, essentially.
Absolutely. And so I want to maybe double click on the safe AI aspect. I think there is, as I mentioned, a lot to discuss there. What do we, again, Matt, you're working with a lot of builders. What do you think the biggest roadblocks are as you're seeing companies of all sizes trying to adopt and embrace generative AI?
Yeah, so from a safety perspective, I've already touched on a couple of the areas. So we talked some about bias, we talked some about avoiding hallucinations, and there are plenty of techniques there. The next area I'd like to touch on is jailbreaks. Essentially, jailbreaks are attempts by the end user to subvert the model to do something that the model's creators, the people who wrote the prompt, the enterprise that's running the model, does not want to have happen. That's something where, if you think about adopting a large language model into your company, it's almost like hiring an employee, or rather hiring a whole set of employees. If you're going to have AI do your customer service, for example, you want to make sure that that AI represents your brand well. And to that end, you want to make sure that the model is quite resistant to jailbreaks. So Anthropic has done a number of techniques to minimize its chance of getting jailbroken. And there's a number of studies that have shown that, for example, while other industry-leading models have had a jailbreak rate of around 50% for the attacks that were tried. Claude's jailbreak rate was around 2%. So we take model safety very seriously, and we want to make sure that if the model is deployed in a public-facing way, that it's extremely resistant to being jailbroken.
Varun, in your conversation with CIOs, what are some of the themes that have emerged around some of the concerns, some of the roadblocks in adopting GenAI-powered solutions?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Matt has also mentioned. I think I would echo everything that Matt has said. I think like what I would build on top of that is that generally when we talk to CIOs, they think of like two classes of use cases that are being powered. One is where you're actually generating some information. And when you generate some information, then there is obviously a lot of angst around what is the source of that, is this correct or not, and what the implications of that are. Having said that, I think Gen AI, especially LLMs, can be used for activities that are not generative, right? So I'll give you an example. In our case, of these 14 capabilities that I mentioned, half of them are use cases where, as a user, let's say retrospectives is a big use case in Miro, right? So you are sitting in a room, at the end of the session, we want to say what was great and what could have been improved. So we get all of your feedback. It's on a single Miro board, bunch of stickies. And what you want to do is sentiment analysis. You want to say what's positive, what's negative, and what's neutral. This capability is actually powered through an LLM. And when we go talk to CIOs, when we go talk to our users, they are actually very happy and usually have no concern whatsoever around these things because there's not new content being generated. However, when we get to generation of content, there are concerns which Matt talked about. And the way we've thought about it and the way we engage our CIOs is that we fundamentally believe that there should be a human in the loop. There is one specific thing about Miro, and I think it's true for Asana as well, is that we are a collaborative app. The definition of collaborative app is that at the given time, there are two or more people on the same canvas that are working together. So imagine a scenario where you generate some information and that was not the output that you wanted. Instantly, the other person who's on the board will actually see that. So one of the user experience sort of innovations or optimizations that we've done in our paradigm, it actually resonates a lot with our customers, is that we actually display it on top of the board and we ask the user, does this look right? And you can say no, discard it, or you can say yes, it looks right, keep it. And that small UX hack or is actually resulting in a lot of users saying, okay, this is something that we can start to roll. So I think the concerns are there. I think to your previous question, I think we get a lot into security reviews, a lot more. And so unlike some of our other capabilities, in the case of LLM-powered capabilities, we had to build a toggle switch. So as an enterprise, for the first time, even though it's a core capability, we had to build this switch because some enterprise customers were not comfortable with rolling it out enterprise-wide. So that's one thing we had to do. And then so I think the role of security and privacy, getting your InfoSec and legal folks involved upfront, we had to redo our terms of service. We had to get an explicit opt-in from the end user. And we built a bunch of these things that basically gave us the confidence and also the confidence to our enterprise buyers around these capabilities.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'll just build on this. I think we have an internal think tank at Asana called the Work Innovation Lab, and they did a study that 9 out of 10 people have concerns about using AI ethically at work, which is way higher than I thought. So yeah, it's clearly easy to feel scared about this. In addition to the toggles and the controls, it's just well, should I use this? Can I use this? So I think it's just really important across the whole company, from builders all the way up to executives. You need to make sure that you think through the principles, design systems, processes, launch reviews, that you're using AI in an ethical way. So as an example, resource management is really big in enterprise work management. And bias is a real factor in LLMs. So if you use AI to make decisions about how do I staff teams, who should be working on this, can easily lead to performance review feedback, which could lead to hiring and firing decisions. And that then could become a really harmful thing. People often be like, oh, Asana, why is bias important? But it's very clear, this link of how we have to be careful about it. So something that, since I joined Asana, it's been always really at the forefront that our mission is to help humanity thrive. And that keeps coming up with AI really often because if we think about like the Help Humanity Thrive lens of resource management, you can kind of spin that around like, why is it even called resource management? Why are we treating humans like cattle that we're just like moving to different pens and they're like disposable, interchangeable? There's a different way we can think about using AI towards that, which is much more employee first. How do we help individuals ramp up best to the work context at hand? We can understand their existing skills, their existing interests, their growth areas, their context on the work. And then there's a lot of magic we can do when they get assigned a project. Be like, oh, here's your onboarding project. Here's a link to a video to learn more about this domain area, and we can kind of set them up for success. So I think there's risks here, but there's also a way to use this and turn it around and make it both better for the company and also just much more magic for the employees.
So one of the aspects I think it's phenomenal in this wave of technology is that safety, critical component of it. But there is an overarching theme here around change management. Change is affecting how teams think about a roadmap. How do we educate users? How do we educate companies around understanding the capabilities of this technology, ultimately addressing fear and anxiety, the necessity of creating these opt-out experience or opt-in experiences. And so how is this, AI has been around for a long time. I mean, it is not something that happened in the past 12 months. And so how is this generative moment of artificial intelligence so different, maybe, Matt?
Yeah, so it has been interesting. I've been working in AI for close to 20 years now, and I would say there are a few very significant differences between the models that have become available in the last year or so versus what was present in the late 2010s. The first is that the scaling laws, which basically showed that if you throw more data and more compute at training, that you get predictably better intelligence as measured by like next token prediction loss. Those scaling laws basically gave a handful of companies the confidence to raise enormous sums of money and then plow all of that money into model training. And so these models just fundamentally are now trained on a good fraction of all human knowledge. And rather than having a specialized model for one task, you have this foundation model that's capable of a wide variety of things, and you elicit the behavior you want through a combination of prompting and maybe some fine-tuning. I would say the second major difference that's shown up in the last few years is the rise of prompt engineering. In the 2010s, if you wanted particular behavior with the model, you had to train it for that behavior in particular, or at the very least, fine-tune it for that behavior. Whereas now, you can actually change the prompt on a daily or even hourly basis as new information becomes available. And that means in an enterprise context where, say, the core knowledge that powers the enterprise, if that's changing on a moment-to-moment basis, the model can now adapt to that via tools like retrieval augmented generation, where essentially the model is getting up-to-date information in its prompt. And as a result, these models can be much more tightly tied in to the day-to-day activities of the enterprise or of the users of that enterprise software.
And so with technology changing so rapidly, maybe Varun and Eric, how are we thinking about structuring our teams? How are we able to innovate when it's almost like the carpet is shifting under your feet?
You want to start?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think of the key question as what you were just saying, like, how do you adapt your teams to this new way of working? And I think that's going to depend a lot on the company. Different teams have different cultures. But I think the biggest change for us was just development's a lot less linear than you're used to, and your muscle memory, every like PM leader I talk to is just like, my muscle memory of what I'm used to, my intuition is just off, and I need to learn that. So we've kind of introduced like 2 phases that we use and we think about when we're doing product development. These names are very literal, not very creative, but the first phase we call ship to alpha, and it's we take a strategic direction and what's the fastest path to getting a working prototype? How do we get this in the matter of days, not months, that something can be used? And this means we had to retrain ourselves on how we collaborate and build. We don't have to start with upfront slide decks and docs. We don't have to start with mocks. We just start with a prompt and maybe a little bit of code in the sandbox and get started. And then we could just see, we also had to train our engineers that throwing away code is okay. I think code can't be precious with this kind of mindset. But then every week now we have these demo days where we can show leadership, like, hey, here's what we're working on, here's the art of the possible, and it really just gets everyone trained up, the whole company. You were saying you can't have this in a silo, like the whole company can see what's happening, which is great. The second phase we call ship to production, which is that 30%, which takes a lot longer than 30% should take, where you have to say, okay, this resonated, this is useful, how do I get it in the hands of customers? How do I get it reliable? How do I get it to be enterprise grade? And that's just really hard. So as an example, a feature we launched recently is called Smart Answers, takes the treasure trove of information in Asana, and you can ask it all sorts of questions. Like if you, my favorite use case is a user feedback project with, I think, like 10,000 tasks in it of individual user feedback items. And it was like, what are the themes from this feedback? And this was really early on. It pulled out a theme and then an example quote. And the example quote was in Japanese, and we didn't ask it, and it just auto-translated it into English. Like, you probably want it in English because you're speaking English. It's just like that kind of magic was great. But for this, we actually, to get it ready for launch, we had to rebuild it 5 times. Complete rebuild over and over. And this goes to what we were talking about earlier of like, you need modular architecture, you need evaluation pipelines, you need to solidify upfront criteria of what do you care about, and from everything from quality to reliability to performance to kind of safety. And then you can kind of, as you iterate and as you go, kind of make progress towards there.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is, for us, it's starting by asking the question around everything that's been built, how can LLMs, Gen AI be part of it? So any product review that happens, any new product concept that actually runs through our process, our first thing is, like, have you thought about it, right? So I think like that's a change of mindset where we are trying to introduce, because to your point, like there was the old way of doing it and then there's the new way. And in order to do the new way, you have to do change management, and change management needs, the muscle needs to be built. So you need to exercise that. So in every single meeting doing that, that's one. I think the second thing is we are a big Slack culture, like some of our folks here as well. And we have a channel around like great AI things that we're seeing out there. So we know that, we're starting to understand the space, but there are a lot more folks out there, companies out there that are doing amazing stuff, right? And so everybody's contributing to it, and we have leadership on a very frequent basis chime in on that. And that actually sends a very big signaling effect, is that of all the channels we could be doing, this is where a lot of the focus is, and people are like, oh, this is great, have you thought about this? This could be taken for our scenario and stuff. That's the second one. And then the third one is that we have a team, our data science team, that actually has the center of excellence in terms of all the amazing work that's happening in terms of foundational models and all the other innovation. And they are driving a bunch of enablement inside of the organization around things, talk trucks and brown bags and other things to help educate and inform. And I think the last thing I'd say is like culturally being very open in terms of taking risks, running experiments, right? So making sure that we're supporting folks, carving out some of their time in order for them to try out these new things.
So I guess, do we think that generative AI has the ability to make employees more productive, users more engaged?
For sure. To make an analogy, imagine what daily life in an office was like in 1970. So no Slack, no Asana, no Miro, no internet access, no computers, no ability to instantly send a document to all your coworkers. Like you had to go to the Xerox machine if you wanted to duplicate information. So if you imagine what it was like to get work done, to collaborate on a document, to collaborate on a project, everything was, you had to walk around and be in the same place, and you had to use typewriters or paper. So information was very hard to copy, it was very hard to disseminate, it was very hard to edit. Cut and paste was literally cutting and pasting things. So this was a fundamentally different work world, and people were far less productive. What happened was, with the digital revolution, information became incredibly cheap to produce, to disseminate, to collaborate on. So I would argue that what we're going to see in the next 5 years is that the developments in AI will make cognition equally cheap in the same way that working with information became cheap over the last 50 years. And so what that will mean is that intelligence will be embedded in every part of the organization. And there are a lot of tasks that happen in large organizations where our human ability to process information and think about social connections is actually limiting us. So for example, people talk about Dunbar's number as the most social connections you can hold in your head at any given time. I believe what will happen is a lot of the breakdowns that you see in organizations that happen because of Dunbar's number will go away. Where essentially issues of, say, executives not knowing the facts on the ground or individual contributors not knowing that the problem that they're trying to solve was solved by someone in another team a month ago. Like all of those issues of like knowledge transfer will start to go away because an intelligent system behind the scenes that actually has the intellectual horsepower to track what's going on with 10,000 employees and figure out what connections need to be made, where a team might be going off the rails, where the company's culture is not getting respected. All of those things can be detected by an AI and steered toward maximum individual and collective productivity.
So adaptability again being key. So jobs are evolving the same way, arguably at a faster pace than they've evolved in the past through the advancement of this technology. And there is an interesting dichotomy here because you talked about generative AI is making, we've seen a lot of the applications of generative AI around creating content. And the dichotomy there that if you think about the typical knowledge worker, now what that's going to do is just going to increase the amount of notification and Slack pings and emails hitting your workday. So how, from a collaboration perspective, I guess, how is Asana thinking about this risk, if you will, of increasing noise?
Yeah, I mean, one of the top focus for Asana is clarity in everything that you're doing, so it's a huge risk for us. I was reading a few months ago, I'm reading more science fiction given this because everything is in the future. So I was reading NFM by Neil Stephenson, and there they have kind of what you're saying, a large data network. They call it reticulum, which is everything out there, all information at your fingertips. But it was flooded with seemingly correct documents that actually were incorrect, like hallucinations. And then they had to have this entire new career, which were people to separate out fact and fiction and kind of curate that, which is kind of what we're seeing with all of this. So it really resonated with me. Hallucinations, the problem, early adoption of AI, a lot of products weren't doing what you were saying with previewing information. They were just throwing information out there. So yeah, we've been thinking about 3 things to help with this. One is when we generate content, it's going to get you 80% of the way there, but you need to rely on design principles to make sure it gets 100%. So preview the content, don't have it be a black box, show citations, and so on. We're focusing our work graph data model, which our co-founder, Dustin Mosfetz, co-founded Facebook and made the social graph, so you can kind of think of it as the work version of that. To make sure it has the most relevant context that we can send to LLMs. And this involves not just LLM use, but better ML ranking about the edge nodes, edges between nodes, embeddings, and so on. And the third is being mindful of when and how we surface third-party data to LLMs, and that's relevant to what we talk about all the time, because you need to be really careful with the scale of data that you're pulling into your product and putting in as context. So as an example, let's say you have 500 spam emails that are all slightly incorrect. You don't want to pull that in and call that fact and have that come into your status report. So that makes your job a lot harder because you need to help separate out fact and fiction. And that's why we're excited to partner on those kinds of use cases.
And so just catch on that, and we have a couple of minutes, so I want to ask a couple of fireside. What are some of the use cases? You talked about status report, and I think that's a bit of a keyword right now for Asana.
Yeah. So for status updates, I think something we're excited about with working with App Fabric is, you want to go one more slide? One more than that. Yeah, so right now the way we do our status reports is we look at all collaboration that's happened in Asana. If you're a heavy Asana user, it works magically. It pulls out insights and nuance of we've been collaborating back and forth and a decision was almost made and it calls that out as a blocker to help move the work forward. But not everything's in Asana. So how do we, maybe there's some blockers that were called out but were actually solved and are in an email and we just need to look at that email to see that. Or maybe there's new risks that weren't in Asana that are in Slack where you say oh no, this customer is now worried, like don't continue the sales progress or process or whatever. So there's a lot of really key insights that we want to pull in at Fabric to help us connect to the various tools that information might be in. And that way we can have a more accurate project health report when we surface it to users.
Interesting. And Varun and Matt, any specific use cases that you think are going to really move the needle as we think about employees' productivity?
Yeah, I think there would be two that I would add to what Eric mentioned. One is around large data synthesis. So if you think about a typical organization and all the omni-channels in which like feedback is coming from customers in, I oftentimes find that product organizations struggle to actually really synthesize it in a way and use it to drive roadmaps. So I think like that's one where large amounts of data can be synthesized into key insights that can start to drive product priorities or business priorities or company priorities. That's one. I think the second one where I think it's going to have a lot of impact is around automation. So, let's take the example of this conference, and all of us draw our architectures for our AWS environments. Like today, what is the process? It's manual. We put all of these things in manually. We put it on some sort of a publishing system. It should be fully automated where you're connected to all of these environments, and it's automatically built, and then there is an AI that sort of starts to drive optimization around it, or questions that you can ask around it. So I would say connectors where things that used to be done manually will now be done automated, and then driving insights on top of it.
Matt, what do you feel about the role of App Fabric for knowledge workers in the context of generative AI?
So where I'm particularly excited about App Fabric is in the cross-application sharing of relevant information. Essentially, when you mentioned the employees spending an hour per day searching for information that they know exists, I just felt that in my heart. I do that so much. And so the idea of not just having relevant information automatically surface to me, but also the unknown unknowns, that document I didn't know existed that's relevant to what I'm doing, to have that pop up in my workflows is particularly exciting. And so I think to be able to enable that in all of the enterprise productivity applications at scale, and to enable those app developers to leverage that information as it comes in, that's super exciting. Also, the fact that you've solved the first question that's going to come from every security team of, hey, wait a minute, this tool is going to be accessing data from these other apps. Will it respect the user's preferences and their access control levels? The fact that you've already solved that just makes it far easier for this kind of feature to get approved by the security orgs.
And that has been one of the premises of actually building App Fabric, really putting, as Adam mentioned, security and privacy at the core of the product and not very much as an afterthought. Well, I think we're at time. Please, folks, join me to say a big thank you for the panelists today. We're going to be hanging around here. If you have questions, you want to engage with Matt, Varun, or Eric, or myself. Other than that, if you're curious about Fabric, we have a session in a couple of hours. You can scan the QR code and join BIZ212 later this afternoon. Beyond that, you can also scan this QR code by visiting our product detail page. One page, yeah, there you go.
People are excited.
Yeah, too excited. All right. And if you want to get started, if you're curious about what's available today for app developers to start using App Fabric, please visit our product page. And as I mentioned, we're going to stick around if you have any questions. Besides that, please join me with a big round of applause for the panelists. Again, thank you.